Bob Bazans, and I'm an alcoholic. And I get the pleasure of introducing Jack to you. The man you're going to hear is a very dear friend of mine. About 11 years ago this April, I was a delegate to the General Service Conference in New York from Minnesota, and walking down the street and tagged along, another two delegates were going, a lady and a guy walking down the street, and I tagged along with them, and we started talking, and one of them was Jack Ford. And we just struck up a relationship, as you kind of do in AA. It's one of the things I love about AA is all our lives are busy, and we don't have room for, sometimes don't think we have any time or room for one more person who's very important to us, and it doesn't matter when you run into the person, you just kind of make room. They just kind of show up and seem important enough that you got to do that. And Jack and I have had a chance we shared that experience of being delegates together, and that's a real profound experience. And Jack went on to be a trustee in the board of directors of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's a important job, and it's always nice to know that we have people who are willing to do that kind of work, number one, but also that do that kind of work and have the kind of recovery and experience that Jack has. He's got 25 years of sobriety, and he just kind of heard about this thing about 6 or 8 weeks ago and called up and said he'd like to come on down. There aren't that many people who have 25 years of sobriety that have that level of enthusiasm and are willing to just, he's a busy man and got a lot to do. And he's been a support to me and a guy who I can sit down and talk with about anything that I got going, and you're kind of a pleasure to hear a guy who is a hell of a member of AA, and he walks like he talks. Jack, my good friend Jack Ford.
Well, hi everybody, I am Jack Ford and I am an alcoholic. Can you hear me up there all right? Thank you, Bob. Yes, Bob is a dear friend, and I'm going to tell you the real story now. We were, as he says, both panel 29 delegates to the General Service Conference. God's sending me a message again. I didn't realize I was that bad. And one of the things that happens during a conference, when they assemble all the delegates together, one of the things that happens is that they elect a delegate chairman. And he's kind of the spokesman for all the assembled delegates for the following year, because there's half of the delegates rotate and the other half come back in the next year. And I happen to be one of the candidates to run for delegate chairman, and so did Bob. Now here's this young guy gets up, and he's well dressed, extremely well spoken, can turn on humility at a moment's notice. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, you son of a bitch. I ain't got a chance. And I was right, I didn't. He became the delegate chairman. So I had to carry that resentment around for a whole long time, for a whole year, until we had the next conference. And I happened to be standing in the Roosevelt Hotel a few days before the conference was about to begin, and Bob came along. He said, let's go for a walk. I said, oh yeah, what's he want me to do? Thinking that there was something that he was going to ask me to do. Some devious plan, some hidden agenda. And it wasn't. It was just to go for a walk. And for him to learn more about me, and for me to learn more about him. And I was very impressed. And I found out that Bob had a whole pile to do with this fellowship, and was willing to do whatever he could to make sure that everything that Bill and Dr. Bob had put together was going to be available not only for us, but for our children and our children's children. An amazing deal. Since that time, we have been fast friends, and any time he happens to get into the area, I try to make a point, or we sometimes even kind of plan a thing, like if there's something exciting going on in Vegas or something like that, it's a good place to have an AA, a spiritual meeting in Vegas, and I'll go down and join them. Anyway, we have met many, many times. As a matter of fact, he was in the proximity about a year ago in Acapulco, and I says, that's a hell of a he's as close as he's going to get this year. So I climbed on a plane and a ship, and off we went to Acapulco and spent some days there together. And I'm going to report to you that nearly everything that he has said today and last night, I have heard before. I haven't heard it all in one time. I've heard a little bit here and a little bit there. We always seem to get in touch with each other's feelings when we sit down and we talk about the problems that we're having at the time that's going on. And I've had a lot of problems since I got sober. And one guy I'd just as soon share with it anybody in this whole world is Bob. And we sit down and we talk. And out of those conversations come some of the most meaningful decisions that I make. And I have made regarding to my sobriety, to my married life, and to my family life. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I want to thank you, Bob. I'm going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about a little bit about service in Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe. I am going to talk about service in Alcoholics Anonymous because this is service in Alcoholics Anonymous. What's happening right here. And it's important. I'm going to talk about love, and I'm going to talk about darkness. I'm going to talk about family. I'm going to talk about sobriety. I'm not a teacher in Alcoholics Anonymous, so if you're here for a lesson, I'm the wrong guy. I'm going to give you a drunk-a-log, because that's my life and that's my story. The most amazing thing that ever happened to my life was to come from where I was to where I am today. I mean, that's it. I kind of think sometimes of my life like a videotape, and I plug it into the VCR every once in a while and spin it back to where I was and who I was and where I'd come from. And I can't believe that person, because then I move it ahead and ahead and ahead to see what happened over the 25 years that I've been in the fellowship. And I just can't believe what's happened to me. Fabulous. Great story. Make a great movie. Terrific. Bob touched on a couple of things, and I might step on some toes here, so if I do, I'm sorry. But that's all right, I'll sleep tonight. He talked about the 200 or 300 other self-help groups that are out there, you know, and when I was a director in AAWS, one of the jobs that we had every month is that as these requests came through, we would have to process them, and we'd either have to approve or disapprove as whatever was necessary, because we used to get all sorts of self-help groups and all sorts of people who wanted to write books, and they wanted to use our 12 steps and our 12 traditions and our book for the basis of whatever they were doing. And we used to kick some of those things around, had some fun with some of them, you know. Like, you know, there's Emotions Anonymous, and there's Overeaters Anonymous, and there's Undereaters Anonymous, and there's Compulsive Shoppers Anonymous, and all of these things. As a matter of fact, we had one time a guy wanted to put the 12 steps and the 12 traditions on a bed sheet, you know, and we were wondering about that, what was going on the top and what was going on the bottom, you know. And then there was a guy who wanted to have a Trivial Pursuit game. And that sounded like a real good deal, and what he was going to do was base all the questions on the Trivial Pursuit game, or on the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, like on Bill's story, who was the golfer he most wanted to be like, you know, and of course the answer was Stan Hagen, and you know, we all know that, don't we? The thing is that you would move along these squares, but if you missed one, you would go back a couple of steps, you see. And if you missed two, you went into a week's treatment. Then there's Sexaholics Anonymous. We kind of kicked that one around. We wondered about that if one was too many and 1,000 wasn't enough. What constituted a slip? There was Prisoners Anonymous. You know, how can you be an anonymous prisoner? Well, I guess you can. Well, then there was Suicides Anonymous, and I thought, well, I'd personally check that one out, and I went to one of their meetings one time, and there was nobody there. And I make fun of these things and lightly just because, my mind works the way it does. But I think about the changes in Alcoholics Anonymous since the time I've been here, what happened today, and what it's likely to be down the line. And a lot of these things have happened. It's been a decade, I guess, of self-help, as Bob talked about, that nearly any issue that anyone might have in their lives that's causing them some discomfort, if they use the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, they will get the answers that they need and they seek. And I guess that happens. But I'm a little bit possessive of our fellowship, and I wish them all well. I hope that anybody who has a problem in their life, that they can find an answer for it. But I kind of stick with the Alcoholics Anonymous program and what happens. The other thing that's happening in the phenomenon lately is professionalism. That bothers me sometimes. Things that they talk about now we never heard of before, like dysfunctional families. Like, I don't know what the hell a dysfunctional family is. I guess I come from a dysfunctional family. I mean, we didn't really think about that, I don't think, when we were young. But it was just a family. And we had good members in the family and bad members in the family. We had alcoholic members in the family and non-alcoholic members of the family. And I don't know whether, because of that dysfunctional family, it altered my life. I guess it did. But I think probably that I altered my own life more than my family altered my own life. Family sent me some messages as I was growing up. But I think the bottom line, I was responsible for myself and what happened in my life. Chemical dependency, there's something else. I can just imagine me going into my old bar haunts and saying, give me a shot of my chemical dependency, People assure me now that if I went into a bar, I would get a shot of my chemical dependency, whatever it might be. All of these things are changing. Professionals are coming in, and they're finding ways to describe us that fits, I guess, the psychologist and the psychiatrist and the professional type of description that they want. When I came in, it was pretty simple. I was an alcoholic. My life was unmanageable. I didn't start out to become an alcoholic. Actually, I was a pretty good jock. I played all sorts of sports. I'd rather play games than grow up. And I just played a lot of games. I had a lot of fun. And of course, drinking went along with the playing of games. In my high school years, I know when we used to, win a game, playing football or whatever it might be, we would always get some beer in and celebrate the victory, And then if you got beaten, you would also get some beer in to celebrate your defeats. Well, towards the end, we were bringing beer in to celebrate ties. So we had a lot of fun with it, and it didn't really interfere with my life. I went off to the Air Force, and booze became, I guess, something I used even more in the Air Force, but it once again didn't necessarily direct my life at that time. I had no trouble with women. I didn't feel uncomfortable with who I was. Okay? I didn't have any trouble making out with the ladies. I could dance. I was personable, and I didn't have trouble making friends. I wasn't a wallflower, any of those things. But I liked to drink. Drinking was the center of action. That's where everybody was, and that's what everybody was doing. And I was right in the center. I got married. And now the drinking, something else happened in my life when I got married, I guess. Something called responsibility came along at the same time. And I didn't know much about responsibility. Responsibility was never big in my life. Never big. I remember, I could always con my way out of anything that might be coming down, so I wouldn't have to face responsibility. I remember the first couple of times in the marriage when I had to face responsibility. And I could maneuver, and I could manipulate, and I could con, and I would be able to talk my wife out of coming down on me too hard. That I always had an excuse or a lie or whatever. And that would work for a while. I think she felt that if she gave me some children, that responsibility would come home. So she gave me 3 children in 3 years and discovered that didn't work. Now things are starting to get tough because as more responsibility came, then I really did start to lean on booze. I really started to drink more because I really didn't like I was uncomfortable, I guess, in the situation I was in. I didn't have enough money, didn't have a good enough job, all of those things weren't working for me. So I found comfort in the friends that I had in the bar and not going home. I didn't really want to be there and listen to all the things that my wife was going to tell me. I remember she was going to leave me. She finally came down and said, look, this marriage is going to be over unless you quit drinking. And I quit drinking for 6 months. It was the toughest 6 months I ever spent in my life. God, it was bone-crunching sobriety. Clutch the table, clutch the arms of the chair sobriety. I would come home after work and sit down and thinking, geez, I should be in the bar with my friends. I mean, I don't have any friends now. I can't drink. I mean, my life is over. I've just got to sit here and listen to her and do all those things. And I'd be sitting there thinking, why am I feeling so badly? Why am I so angry? Why isn't it working for me? Sobriety is, like Bob says, things are supposed to be getting better, and they weren't getting better. They were getting worse. But I stuck to it. I stayed sober, and I stayed sober through a Christmas. And I felt pretty good about that. The one thing that did happen with that forced sobriety was that I had some money. You can't drink like I drink and have any money. But when you quit drinking, I had some money. And I remember we had this, I had a pretty good Christmas with the children and everything. And I said, well, we should really celebrate. Have a New Year's party. I'm not going to drink. But we haven't had our friends in, and we haven't, because I'm not drinking and all these things. We don't see anybody anymore. Why don't we have a party and invite all our friends in for New Year's Eve? And she said, okay. So I got some booze and food in and did all the things for a New Year's party. And sat back waiting, invited everybody, family, friends, everybody that we knew. Come on over, New Year's Eve, I'm throwing a party. They said they'd come. About 9 o'clock at night, I'm sitting there by myself. The greatest fog that had hit Vancouver in many, many years had rolled in, and there was no cars moving anywhere. I mean, it would have been crazy to drive anywhere. And I looked at them, and I said, oh, they'll make it. Midnight rolled around, nobody had shown up. People had phoned, it's too foggy, I can't be there. Midnight rolled around, my wife went to bed. So I was sitting there looking at the food and looking at the booze. I said, oh, what the hell? And I started to drink. 10 weeks later, I came home. Everything I owned was piled in the middle of the floor. Just my clothes. My wife was gone. My 3 children were gone. Everything. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what had happened. No dear John, nothing. And I went into a period that I call my black period. Went into a period of my life that I couldn't understand. Went into a period of my life that I didn't want to happen to me. You see, I had been programmed that once you got married for life. My mother had never kicked my old man out. She had put up with all this stuff. Why wasn't my wife doing the same for me? I mean, I wasn't programmed to be alone. I moved into a basement room, and I hated that basement room. It was dingy, and it was dark. And I hated being there, and I hated my own company, and I hated being lonely. So I would seek companionship. The only place I knew to find companionship was in a bar. Then the Mounties were coming down with the paper, and the court processors were giving me the papers about the separation. And the anger was starting to build up. Why was she doing this to me? And of course she was angry at me. Why did this happen in our lives? So I hated that time. And I became very angry and very dark. And I just didn't understand. And she wouldn't let me see the kids. She wouldn't talk to me. The only time we ever talked was in a court of law. And all that anger. Terrible time. But I knew there was a solution. I need another wife. So time went by, and I cleaned my act up and spotted a lady, put it all together, and did what drunks do very well. You know, you can be very, very gentlemanly and very, do all the right things and give her flowers at the right time, take her out to dinner and all those things. And I won her. I won her. We got married. She became pregnant. Responsibility came back. Started to drink again, heavier and heavier. Eventually, the time came where that wasn't working. I was telling her more lies. I became an accomplished liar. You guys are all, you know what I'm talking about. I used to come home after I was gone, I would always go for a couple of 3 days, and then I'd spend all the money, and then I'd be afraid to go home. And this had happened again. I'd spent all the money, and I was sitting in a bar, and I didn't want to go home. But I did. And I walked home. I remember going home, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. That's the other thing that I got very good at. Kind of judging when she'd be in bed. You never want to go home when she's awake, because you're going to get it, right? So you kind of outwait her until she goes. She can't last, and then you kind of sneak in, and you sneak in and slip into bed, never move a muscle, never say anything. And I'd become very good at that. Anyway, I came home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she was up watching the Late Late Show. And I said, "Hi, honey, guess where I've been?" And she didn't say anything. And I said, "Geez, I met some guys, and we're going to open a business in Seattle, and we were down there for 2 or 3 days, and unfortunately I spent all the money, but we're gonna be millionaires starting next week. It's all coming together. Trust me." And she didn't say anything. And then I went on to something else, and she didn't say anything. Then I started to get angry. I said, "You don't love me anymore." And she didn't say anything. I says, "I'll show you." And in my bedroom there was a .22 rifle. Now, I don't like guns. It was her brother's gun. And I knew it was in there. And for some odd reason I had one .22 shell. So I went into the bedroom and I slammed the door. Sat there for an appropriate length of time. She didn't come in. Took this gun out, put that .22 shell in it, and blew the biggest Jesus hole you ever saw in the wastepaper basket. And laid back on the bed. And I laid there. And I laid there. And I laid there. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I went running into this, you don't love me anymore. I could be dead in there. She says, "I knew you wouldn't do anything." Some 15 years later, she said, "I was petrified. That's why I didn't go in. I was petrified that you'd done it." She was pregnant, having a baby. I couldn't keep a job. The desire to drink was controlling my life. I was afraid of losing this second wife because I didn't want that to happen. I had lived in that lonely basement room, and I didn't want it to happen again. No. One of the things that happened that I'm not very proud about, I don't talk about very often, was that son was going to be born. I'm out of work. Couldn't afford the doctor's bills. The only way it could be handled is if she went on welfare. So she moved in with her aunt so that she could have this baby and have the medical bills taken care of. And I went and lived with a brother. The baby was born. Did I come and share that moment of great excitement? No, I was on a drunk. 2 days before I show up. My wife didn't like that very much. She didn't find it very comforting. Was I on time to pick her and the baby up to take them home? No, I was 4 hours late. Had to have a few drinks on the way. Wasn't a very pleasant event for her. Should have been the best thing that ever happened in her life. But it didn't, and it wasn't. I don't know whether you guys relate with this or not. I had found out a long time ago you had to have money to drink. And I was a check writer, because it used to take 3 days for a check to process through the bank. And I could write a check on Monday at a local department store and cash it for, say, $10. Wednesday, I could go to another department store and write one for $20 and put one in for $10. Friday, I'd go to a different department store, write one for $30 and put 20 in. What happened was that the more I drank, the shorter my memory got. And I was walking home one day and the cops stopped me. They asked me where I was going, what I was doing. I said, just going home. Well, we want you. And I said, no, you couldn't want me. I'm an upstanding citizen. I don't do wrong things. And they said, well, we got to take you downtown anyway. So they take me downtown and pull out a shoebox full of these checks. And they said, is that your signature? I said, well, sure. What's the problem? They said, well, these checks are no good. And I said, well, no big deal. Here, I'll write you a check. They put me in jail. They set the bail at $200. They allowed me a phone call. And I phoned my wife and I said, no big deal. I'm in jail. It's a big mistake and everything else like that. It's only $200 bail. I knew she didn't have it, but I said, phone my mother, my father, my 2 brothers, my sisters, the guys I'd grown up with, the guys I played football with, the guys I went to high school with, the people I had worked with. I gave her at least 40, 50 names. Any one of them would be delighted to put up $200 to get me out of jail. 4 days later, while I'm in a remand holding cell, and they're slipping my meals to me under the door, and I've had 3 or 4 days to become angry because she had let me down again. Finally, somebody had put up the $200. I came home and I was just furious at her. She says, I tried everybody. Nobody would put up the bail. They said, leave him there. And for 6 months, I got drunk at those people. One of the things that happens in Canada, I don't know what it's like here, I was called and I had to appear in court. And every Friday I had to go down to court and appear, and they would remand it for another week, but I had to be prepared in case they'd called the case. I had a lawyer. I would go down there and they'd remand it for another week, but I'd have to sit there in that court long enough to look up at the judge. And I looked at this judge, and he was a nasty sucker, I want to tell you. Jaywalking, 60 days. Shoplifting, 2 years. Assault, 2 years. And I'm looking at what this guy is doing to these people, and he's not listening to anyone. He's finding everybody guilty. And I knew he was going to get me. I would go down the next Friday, get drunk, because if I'm going to do a couple of years' time, I may as well go out in style. And we'd do the same thing the next Friday, And the funny thing about judges, is they always drape them in black, and they're always way up there, looking down. And he was a horrid-looking little guy. Anyway, we went through that process, and eventually they called me and they did a pre-sentence report and all this jazz that went with it. And they gave me a year's suspended sentence with the provision that I quit drinking. And I agreed because I didn't want to go to a jail. I'd just soon be on the street. And that's what happened. But I was still full of anger. Still full of anger at all those people who had let me down. And I continued to drink. My wife had this little baby. I was running from responsibilities once again. My ex-wife was after me for back alimony and child support. I kept on moving around. I couldn't handle it anymore. I came home from work one day, and this probation officer was in my living room. I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" He says, "I'm going to put you in jail." I said, "Why?" He says, "You're not supposed to be drinking, and you're drinking." I says, "I'll quit. I'll quit. I'll show you. I'll quit." And I went into the kitchen and phoned Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't know why I did that to this day, why I phoned AA when my biggest need was there, but I did. And I came out, and he bought it. It was like Bob's talking to the psychiatrist. He bought the package, and he let me on the street. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I want to tell you, the guy came to get me at 7 o'clock to go to the meeting. That was 2 hours before the meeting. I didn't know why. But he says, "I'll be there at 7. And he came and he knocked on my door, and I opened the door, and there he was standing. We were living in a terrible walk-up flat above stores. I had a $10 bed and a $5 chair and a $10 couch. I tried to put something together for this wife and baby, and it wasn't doing very well. He says, "Can I come in?" And I said, No. My wife is, busy or something like that. But when I opened the door and looked at him, here he was standing in a suit and a tie, and he well-groomed, and had a smile on his face. His name was Bill. And I thought, God, he looks good. He looked like a banker. Anyway, we went off to my first meeting. And we walked into that meeting, and I'll never forget it. To this day, I won't forget it. If I ever get a chance to tell anybody, if I ever get a chance to do the same thing to anybody, I will try and do it. He took me to that meeting, and he was there because he had to set up the chairs and make the coffee. And that meant we were the first ones at the hall. And as people came in, he introduced me to them, each one at a time. "Meet Jack, he's the new guy." And they said, "God, it's good to see you." And they would talk to me. Okay? Now, it had been a long time since I'd been in a hall where people would welcome me. If you drink like I drank, you become isolated. You're isolated from your friend and your family and everybody else. And eventually, the only people you can talk to are the ones in the bars. They were happy to see me, every one of them. And the thing that they impressed me then, that it impresses me now, they didn't talk about me. They talked about themselves. They told me who they were, what had happened, and where they had come from. And they encouraged me that those things could happen in my life if I would walk with them. And I got on that pink cloud of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know what they were talking about when they said, "You will ride a pink cloud in Alcoholics Anonymous." I said, "Ho, ho, ho, you don't know me. I owe everybody." I mean, household finance. I used to have a foot race to the payroll clerk. Guys with garnishee orders, household finance, Pacific finance, beneficial finance. I was sober 5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous before I knew you could borrow money in a bank. Just owed everybody. Ex-wife, every time I saw a guy in a uniform, I knew exactly, if he was within a half a block of where I lived, I knew why he was there. Another process. Hadn't paid the alimony, hadn't paid the child support. Back to family court. Listened to that lady in her anger of what I wasn't doing. How bad I was and how no good I was. Yeah. I walked with those guys and I went on this pink cloud. They did things to me and with me that I never ever dreamed would happen. They took me into their homes. We did the steps. We did everything. They made sure I went to a meeting every night. They gave me they kind of led me to a sponsor, a spiritual advisor that would put me back in touch with some of the things that I had walked away from many years before. I loved those guys. I loved what they did. And I got on that pink cloud, because my mother and my father were saying, "Oh, Jack, geez, isn't it wonderful he's not drinking anymore?" My wife was saying, "Oh, Jack, isn't it wonderful, you're not drinking anymore, you're starting to become responsible." Everybody was saying what a good job I was doing, and all I was doing was staying sober and following these people. But the time would come when I'd drink again. And I drank, and it was insane drinking. I drank insanely for 10 weeks. Never stopped. Just insanely. Never drank like that before. One day I was in my apartment again with my own thoughts. My wife wasn't going to leave me. They weren't going to put me in jail. Nothing was going to happen to me, except I was thinking about me, who I was and where I was going. And I said, there's got to be a better thing going for Jack. If I'm going to continue to drink, I may as well walk out of these people's lives. Because I'm destroying their life and I'm destroying my own. If I want to drink, I may as well go to Skid Row. Put out my hand and just bum and drink. Or maybe I can go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, when you failed in Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't feel very good. I mean, I was a total failure when I came here. I mean, we are all failures. Bob talked about that. But when you have failed here, you've really done it. And I didn't want to come back. And I was afraid of what was going to happen when I did come back. I was afraid of what you were going to say. I came back, and there was no, I told you so, you dummy, or anything else like that. They were saying, God, it's good to see you, Jack. We missed something. Let's start all over again. Maybe we work a little harder with you. Maybe things will come better. And they welcomed me back with love. Greatest experience that ever happened. Now, staying sober was hard. Staying sober was really hard. Because I had failed once. And if you failed once, you just sure as hell don't want to make any mistakes because you'll fail again. But I stayed sober. Now, there was no pink cloud. It was damn hard work. But I had made that decision that I was going to do everything that I was told to do. Anytime anybody asked me to do something, I was going to do it. I wasn't going to question whether I was in the right place or I was in the wrong place, whether I was too young or whether I drank too much or whether I didn't drink enough. I wasn't going to question anything. I was just going to accept what they said, and I was going to do something about the 12 steps and the 12 traditions in my life. That's the attitude I came back with. I haven't had a drink since. That was July the 19th, 1965. Things didn't change immediately. I'm going to talk a little bit about love. I was saying to somebody earlier that I can say I love Bob, and I can say I love Bill, David, John. These guys are all, and I mean it. I'm committed. That's a commitment that I make, that I love these guys. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love my children, my sons and daughters. I don't have any problem with that. But here I am married 27 years to the same woman. I have a tough time saying I love you. Why is that? Because I guess I have this commitment that I have been given in Alcoholics Anonymous, and if I committed myself to AA, things worked out. But if I commit myself to my wife, and she does something, then I'll be hurt, and I don't want that to happen again. So I have a tough time relating with her the way I should. But I have learned about love. That boy that was born when I got sober, when he was 13, turned his life into drugs and alcohol, did all the things that dumb kids do. I fought to keep him out of jail. I paid lawyers' fees. We had him psychoanalyzed upside down and sideways. We had family therapy. We had anything going that we could to make sure that this kid would go right. And it was a real puzzlement to me because here he had been raised in this AA family. He had been raised seeing what had happened in my life from where I had come from. He knew the whole story. Eventually I had bought a business and things were going well for us financially. Eventually we had a little sister for him when I was sober 5 years or something. No, 9 years, I guess. 5 years. And, he had seen all these wonderful miracles happen in my life. Yet here he was out there doing and using and abusing and drinking and breaking and entering and doing all those dumb things. And I would take him to the side and I'd say, Dan, can't you see? You're going the same way as your old man. Look what it did to me. I had to come to Alcoholics Anonymous before I got happiness and before I got some serenity and peace of mind. You're going to do the same thing. I remember a psychiatrist. We were having an interview because I'm trying to find the answers to this kid. The psychiatrist says, he's 17 now. He said, he admires you and loves you very much. I said, well, why is he doing what he's doing? And he said, the answer is simple. You never cleaned your act up until you were 32. He's got 15 more years to go. Get off his back. That was his attitude. When he was 20, shortly before he was 20, and Bob was in town visiting with me, I said, I've had enough with this kid. I've paid thousands of dollars to keep him out of jail. I have literally, this family has done everything they can to make him change and become part of the family. We've had it. He's history. No more will I allow this little bugger to hurt me anymore. Bob says, that's your decision, that's okay. But if you're in a position to help him now and you don't, how will you feel 2 or 3 years down the line? Will you look back and say, geez, I could have helped the kid, but I didn't. So he says, you make the decision based on what you want to happen to you, not what you want to happen to him. So I helped him one more time. And in January, after that, we were down in the court. Only this time he had a lady judge. She was looking down at him, and they were doing the same pleading for him that they had been doing for me. Okay. Keep him out of jail. She listened to all this stuff, and she turned to the kid and she says, I don't buy it. She says, you've had all these chances and you've turned them all down. My instinct tells me I should put you in jail. My instinct tells me that by leaving you out in the street, nothing good is going to happen out of this thing. You're going to continue to do what you did. But because of these people here, I'm going to give you one more chance. And it worked. He went into a treatment house or a transition house, cleaned up his act. He's never had any trouble since. It's 5 years ago.
Message.
Please turn the tape over to continue the message.
I've got to tell you about judges. After I was sober a couple of years, I was at a meeting on the inside of town, I came from the other side of town, so, there's the inside of town where all the professional people and all the yuppies go and all the rich ones go and everything else like that. And I never felt comfortable going there, so I never went. But I had an occasion to have to go this time because of my sponsor. So we were there, and I felt uncomfortable. Sometimes you can go to an AA meeting and feel uncomfortable, and this was happening to me. And I was sitting at the back of the hall, and I'm looking at this chairman. And I said, I know that guy from somewhere. And it didn't register, and I didn't hear anything that was said during that meeting. I just kind of focused on this guy. I was wondering where I knew him from. About half-time, I started draping him in black. Here was my judge. Here was my judge. Sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, 7 years. I like to think that I was put in front of that judge so that the events of my life would lead me to AA. Right? He used to love me to come to his cake, he's dead now, and tell that story. Because as I would tell about me down here looking up there, he says, well, I was up there looking down there, and I was saying, there's a future trustee of Alcoholics Anonymous right there. A lot of things happen in your life. You get involved in service, and sometimes You let your commitment to Alcoholics Anonymous get in the way of some of your relationships. Like I say, I can tell 100, 2,000 people at an AA meeting that I love them, but I have a tough time sometimes telling my wife that. And I don't know why. I wish it was better. But our life is getting better because we are now starting to look at each other in different eyes, through a new pair of glasses, as Chuck said. We're becoming more to rely on each other for more things, more companionship, more closeness. When you're so busy in Alcoholics Anonymous, sometimes those things go by the boards. And I guess if I had my life to live over, although I've loved every minute that I've done, I wish maybe I could have brought her inside the circle, as Bob said. Inside the circle of my life, where a lot of you people were, and she wasn't. We're working on that now. Bringing her inside my life where you people are. If I can make these commitments to you, I can make these commitments to her. She's a wonderful lady. She does some neat things for me, and between her and God, they surprise me daily. They really do. I'll never forget the time that we had the little girl. I'd had 3 children by my first wife, 2 by my second. And I remember going through the birth thing the proper way, of being a support to her, of being in the hospital, and enjoying that excitement of life. It was fabulous. It was fabulous. If I'd have known there was such good feeling and that you could have such a high out of those births, I would have been there for them all. Booze took me away from them all. I have a special relationship with that daughter. I mean, the love was there immediately. I didn't have to prove it to her. The others, I had to prove it to them. A couple of years ago, I was reading the obituaries in the paper, and I saw the name of an ex-mother-in-law. My ex-mother-in-law, she had died. And I said, wow, look at that. Now, I had no idea the addresses. I knew my wife lived in Nanaimo. I knew that she had remarried. I hadn't seen those kids in 23 years. Didn't know what had happened to them, how they'd grown up, what they looked like. I was denied that forever. An old sponsor of mine in AA said, I said, I'm going after them. He says, no, you can't. He says, you've got to give them the opportunity to live a normal life. You can't be bouncing in and out of their lives. If and when the time comes, as God sees fit, you will see them again. And I was reading this obituary, and they were here. They were going to have this memorial service in Vancouver and not Nanaimo. My wife said to me, she says, you've got to go. And I said, well, Jesus, I can't go. I can't walk into a funeral and say, here's Dad. You know? And what am I going to say? She says, you've got to go. This will be maybe the only opportunity in your life to see those children again. So I went. My daughter went with me and a friend in AA. We snuck in the back of the chapel. They didn't know we were there. That's the first time I'd seen those children in 23 years. The service was over. They didn't even know I was there. And they had a reception up at the front. We slipped out the back. And I was really grateful for that opportunity because they looked great. She had done a wonderful job with them. They obviously had it all together. They were nice kids, all adults. I wrote her a letter. First time I had tried to communicate with her for 23 years. I wrote her a letter and I expressed my sorrow in the passing of her mother. I told her that I had been at the service. And I told her that, she'd done a fine job with the children. And I was really pleased to have been there. And I never heard a word back because that was the first time I'd had her address in all those years. A year later, I got a letter, and it was from her. And it wasn't an angry letter. It was a nice letter, and it was informative, and that she said that she had wished that I had spoken to her at the funeral. Okay. She told me about the children, that I'd had a daughter who was married and living in Calgary, had 2 children, and a son who was married and lived in Calgary, but at that time happened to be working in Vancouver, and another son who was still on Vancouver Island. And she says the youngest one, the one that's in Vancouver, would like to see you. She told me where he worked, and I made that connection. And we got together, that boy and I, my wife, son and daughter from my second marriage, accepted him as a brother, brought him into our family circle, and he's still there. Still there. A year ago, he made me a grandfather. We have a great relationship. Not only him and I and his wife, but our whole family. Our whole family. Last summer, my ex-wife happened to be in Vancouver. She brought her husband over for some tests. They discovered that he had inoperable cancer. Couldn't do anything for him. And I think in 9 weeks he was dead. But she was in and out of Vancouver a great deal of time. My son Kelly now lives in Vancouver. He was with his mother a great deal. They were going to have a funeral service for him in Vancouver. And Kelly asked me if he could borrow my car, and I said, sure. He has a van. Sure. So I was sitting at home the night of this funeral. At 9 o'clock, the phone rang, and she said, and it was Kelly, and he says, I'm going to bring your car back. He said, my brother Scott wants to come. I hadn't seen him for 25 years, or I hadn't talked to him for 25 years. And he says, his mama's coming too. Anger, darkness, resentments, all of those things that I'd come into Alcoholics Anonymous with about that woman and those kids. All of the hate I felt because she had denied me the opportunity to talk to them. I'd been denied 20 some odd years of their lives. And they were coming to my home. I said, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? I hugged her and gave her a kiss. Told her I was sorry. We now have a new relationship. My ex-wife and my wife. My 2 of those children, I've still got a daughter who's resisting meeting the old man. My 2 sons from that marriage and my current family. Marvelous. What a videotape. What did I do? Stayed sober and went to meetings. What's this whole thing about? Life and this life in Alcoholics Anonymous? It's about family. It's about love, and it's about people, and it's about service. That's what it's about. What an opportunity we have. The dregs of society. I wondered one time why I loved you people so much. When I drank and I couldn't understand what was happening in my life and what was happening in my home, or in the job, or anything else, I went to the bar where my pals were and I told them what was happening, and they listened to me. They didn't criticize me. They didn't not try to tear me down or anything. They listened to my diatribe, whether it was justified or not justified. These were the only people that would listen to me. They were all in the bars. When I was in trouble deepest, I went to the bar. I didn't go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a priest or a minister. I went where those friends were. And guess what? They were like you. The people I drank with were in AA. And I could tell them what was wrong with my life and what was the matter with the job and what was the matter with all those things. Once again, they didn't pass judgment. That's why I was comfortable in Alcoholics Anonymous. You would listen to me, like you're listening today. I haven't said anything that's going to keep any of you sober. I don't think, maybe. Sometimes the person I have to hear most when I go to an AA meeting is me. Not you. What I have to say today affects me. I have to hear it through my own ear. What a wonderful deal. Isn't it a paradox that the most significant thing I ever did in my life was not being a member of the Board of Trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous, or a delegate, or an area chairman, or the president of a company, or anything. The most significant thing I did in my whole life was come to Alcoholics Anonymous. My whole life. It meant everything to my relationship with my wife and my children. It meant everything to my family, my mother and my father, my brothers and sisters, my friends. Everything changed in their relationship with me because I came to AA. And I changed. Bob talks about work. Funny thing went on, I was spinning wheels, a couple of years sober, and saying, I'm not getting ahead. I'm looking at you guys, and you're all getting ahead. I look at David, and Jesus, look at he's doing great. Bob, look at what's happening in Bob's life, and I'm not doing anything. I'm not getting anywhere. My also sponsor said, well, that's strange. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I go to work. He says, well, what do you do at work? And I says, I work. He says, that's it. You just go to work and you work. I said, yeah. He says, I guess you take a half-hour coffee break? And I says, yeah. An hour lunch? And I said, sure. Everybody else does. He says, what about the man? I says, what man? He says, the boss. What about the boss, the guy that signs your check? What do you give him? I'm there every day. He says, what's he pay you? And I told him, and he says, what's he pay you that for? And I says, he pays that to me for 8 hours work. He says, are you giving him 8 hours work? And I said, no, I'm not. He says, try it. You might like it. So I started doing 8 hours work for 8 hours pay. And I want to tell you, if you do that, you get noticed. And success started to come my way. And with success came material growth, material things. And that aren't all that important. They're nice to have. So I was growing on the job. I was working my ass off in Alcoholics Anonymous, missing a little bit on spirituality. And I talked to my sponsor and I said, what about God? I says, I don't see it working too well for me. And he says, well, you're looking in the wrong place. He says, you look at the folks out there. You watch what happens in their life. You watch what happens in Bob Bazance's life. You watch what happens in David's life, and Bill's life. And you can be guaranteed that if it's working for them, it is working for you. I don't have a telephone to God, but God has done some wonderful things for me. The most wonderful thing He gave me was an opportunity to be sober. When I got sober, He gave me the opportunity to be of service. That's what life's about, being of service, of love and of family. The rest is all frills. Right? I hope, because you're going to listen to some great stuff yet from Bob. I look at my Seiko watch. I hope that this weekend is going to be as meaningful to you as it has been to me. Because every time I have the chance for self-examination, I come away a winner. Every time somebody comes up and puts the mirror in front of me so I can look at me, I come out the winner. Okay? Every time I have the chance to be with somebody who is doing something about their lives, I come out the winner. So your doing things for me that I can't do for myself. It's been that way since I came here. It will always be that way. That you and God are doing for me what I can't do for myself. And I have found comfort in seeking God. And I seek God through you. So I hope I can serve you and find my God, because that's why I'm here. Thanks and God bless. Want to know about the duties of a trustee? We have a General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, of which there's 21 members. There was structured back in 1951. It wasn't all 21 at that time, but the General Service Board was struck in 1951 to take the captainship of the ship of Alcoholics Anonymous from the co-founders when anything should happen to them. At that time, they also struck up the General Service Conference, of which there's now 91 delegates around North America, Canada, and the United States. Now, they have a conference every year. Basically, anything that happens in Alcoholics Anonymous is passed through that conference. But they have ongoing things and ongoing problems that happen as the year goes on, and your General Service Board meets 4 times a year. There's several committees involved with that. Like you will have there's a chairman of the Finance Committee, there's a chairman of the International Convention Committee, chairman of the International Committee, chairman of the Cooperation with the Professional Community Committee, and these trustees committees work year-round on whatever projects they happen to be on. I'll get there. Of that board, there is now 7 non-alcoholic and 14 alcoholic trustees. The 7 non-alcoholics at one time were a predominance of our board was non-alcoholic. And it was non-alcoholic because we didn't trust ourselves. We didn't want the responsibility. Okay? But eventually the non-alcoholics say, hey, this is your game. You guys gotta have the majority in here. We'll come along and we'll work with you all we can, and we'll do whatever we can for you in the fellowship. But the ultimate authority has got to be in your hands. So they changed the blend from, I think it was 10 and 8, non-alcoholic to alcoholic, to the current 21 board members. 7 of them are non-alcoholic and 14 are alcoholic. Of that, 4 of them are General Service trustees, which come out of the New York area generally. They come from our 2 corporate boards, which is the Grapevine Board and the AA World Services Board. And then there's 8 regional trustees. I was one for Western Canada. There's Eastern Canada, Western Canada, the Pacific region, which this one's in, East Central, and so on. There's 8 regions, and those are all elected from the fellowship. Then there's 2 at large, 1 at large Canada, 1 at large U.S. That's the structure of your board. Now, they don't necessarily, or they don't really make any major decisions. The conference makes most of the major decisions, but they do kind of steer the ship through the choppy waters from time to time. And the fellowship, as it is structured, has been put in their care. So it's an important deal. AA is growing. I mean, there's now 86,000 groups worldwide, I believe. And there's something over 2 million members. We sell over 1 million books, big books of Alcoholics Anonymous every year. I mean, that's just phenomenal, what the books that we sell. We have our own publishing company. We have the AAWS, or AA World Services Board, which operates our General Service Office in New York. We have AA staff, and they all have certain assignments, public information or whatever, and they all work on our behalf. There's 124, I believe, paid employees in our General Service Office in New York. And I don't know what the current budget is, but I think it's around $7 or $8 million a year. So self-support is an important part of it, because we've always kind of supplemented the lack of self-support by selling literature. And so when you buy books, you're generally contributing to the welfare of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of what it's all about. In Seattle, you're all going to have the great opportunity of going to an international convention. From listening to what you were giving your sobriety dates, not many of you had the opportunity of being in Montreal. And it was kind of a mountaintop experience. I was on the board at the time, and I had to walk across the Olympic Stadium in Montreal when 47,000 people were just blowing their minds out. I mean, they were just yelling and roaring with great energy. And I was walking across the field with the other board members, and we were saying, why are they yelling like this? You know, they were just, it was just a mind-boggling experience. Bob was sitting up there listening to all these people yell. They were yelling at the world, we're okay. AA works. We're happy. We took over the whole city. We just had a glorious time in Montreal. Fabulous time. And that's going to happen in Seattle. There'll be 40,000, I'm sure. And everybody's going to have a big badge on, and you'll see more hugging and kissing and handshaking and how are yous than any place you've ever seen in the whole world. You'll see more ice cream go down, more people dancing, more people smiling. I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see more people smiling than you ever saw in your whole life. And every one is going to be saying, God, it's good to be sober. Thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay?